She whispered, "Mommy, if I sit down, my private part will hurt." When she fearfully refused to sit at the family dinner table, they said, "She's just being difficult." But what I uncovered next made my hands tremble as I dialed 911. Hey, Reddit. My name is Lena Carter, and the night my world change started with mashed potatoes and a child's quiet refusal to sit at the dinner table. It was a warm Friday evening, and we were visiting my husband's side of the family, his parents, sister, nieces, nephews, for a traditional dinner at his childhood home. I had been married to Ryan for 3 years. And while we weren't without our issues, I'd always thought our love was built on something solid. We had a 6-year-old daughter named Maisie, bright, curious, and so full of light it felt like she could outshine the sun. She was the kind of kid who noticed the smallest details, like the way light flickered through the curtains or how butterflies always landed on purple flowers. But that night, she wasn't herself. When we arrived, Maisie was unusually clingy. She held my hand tightly, refusing to let go even when her cousins ran up to greet her. I bent down and asked gently, "You okay, baby?" She nodded, but her eyes darted nervously to the far side of the living room where Ryan's younger brother, Uncle Chase, was standing with a beer in hand. Chase had always rubbed me the wrong way. Too touchy, too jokey, the kind of guy who always wanted to wrestle with the kids even when no one else was in the mood. But every time I voiced it, I was told I was being overprotective. "That's just Chase," they'd say with a chuckle. "He's harmless." But that night, something was different. Dinner was almost ready, and we were all gathering around the large oak dining table. Plates were set, drinks poured, kids were seated with little booster cushions. I noticed Maisie still standing awkwardly near the corner of the room, clutching the hem of her dress. "Sweetie," I said gently, "come sit." "Honey, dinner's ready." She didn't move. Ryan raised his voice a little, trying to sound playful. "Maisie, come on now. Don't be difficult." But she looked at me, tears welling up in her big green eyes, and whispered, so quietly I almost didn't catch it, "Mommy, if I sit down, my private part will hurt." The air left my lungs. Everything around me went silent. The clinking of glasses, the chatter, the sound of Ryan's mother bringing out the casserole, all of it faded. "What did you say?" I asked, gently kneeling in front of her. Maisie's lip trembled. "It hurts. It hurt last night too when Uncle Chase hugged me real tight." My skin went ice cold. I looked around the room. No one had heard her but me, and I suddenly felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff with no bottom. I scooped Maisie into my arms and walked quickly toward the guest room down the hallway. She clung to me the hallway, whispering, "Please don't tell him I told you." I wrapped her in a blanket, sat on the bed, and kept my voice steady. "You're safe with me. I promise." Then I stood up, walked into the en-suite bathroom, and shut the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. I didn't even hesitate. I dialed 911 because whatever was happening, whatever had been ignored, overlooked, or excused for years, it ended tonight. When the dispatcher answered, I explained what my daughter had told me. I used direct language, held nothing back. They told me to remain calm and stay where I was. Officers would be there within 15 minutes. I stared at myself in the mirror, heart pounding. My reflection didn't even look like me. Just a woman trapped in a nightmare, but ready to go to war. I stepped out of the bathroom, kissed Maisie's forehead, and told her everything would be okay. I didn't leave her side. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights lit up the driveway. You'd think that would have made my in-laws panic. It didn't. They were furious at me. Ryan's mom demanded to know what was going on. Ryan pulled me aside, his voice sharp. "What the hell, Lena? You called the cops? Here? In front of my whole family?" "Yes," I said, staring him dead in the eye. "Because your daughter told me she was hurt." "She's just being dramatic," he said, flustered. "Chase would never don't." I cut him off. "Don't you dare defend him." And then the door opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. I gave them a full statement while Maisie stayed safely in the guest room with a female officer and a child advocate who arrived shortly after. My daughter was so brave, so brave. She answered questions gently, carefully, like she didn't want to make anything worse, like she'd been taught not to be a problem. Chase denied everything, of course, acted shocked, outraged, but then the medical examiner's preliminary report came back. There were signs of trauma, fresh and old. And Chase, who everyone had sworn was harmless, was taken into custody that same night. I wish I could say the family apologized. They didn't. They blamed me, said I had poisoned Maisie's mind, that I wanted attention, that I misunderstood something innocent, but I didn't need their approval. I needed justice. Maisie needed safety, and I wasn't going to let her suffer for the sake of anyone's reputation. Ryan packed a bag that night and left with his parents. He hasn't called since. Honestly. Good. Because when a man chooses his brother over his daughter, he makes it very clear who he truly is. I've moved out of that house. Started therapy with Maisie. We're living in a new apartment, just the two of us and our golden retriever, Lucy. It's small, but it's peaceful. Safe. Ours. Maisie still flinches when someone raises their voice. She still avoids sitting on hard chairs, but she laughs again. She plays with dolls. She paints pictures of gardens and rainbows and unicorns. And every night before bed, she wraps her arms around my neck and whispers, "Thank you for listening to me, Mommy." It had been 3 weeks since I made that 911 call, 3 weeks since I watched Chase get led away in handcuffs while my in-laws stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide. Like I was the villain for finally exposing the rot in their picture-perfect family. And, honestly, I hadn't cried. Not once. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. The betrayal, the silence from Ryan, the realization that for years, Chase had been allowed to roam freely through their lives while everyone looked the other way. But I couldn't afford to fall apart because Maisie needed me to hold it together. The detectives had kept me in the loop. The case against Chase was stronger than anyone expected. Maisie's medical report revealed more than I wanted to know, signs of trauma going back months, things I'd overlooked, changes I had brushed off as moods or tantrums, not realizing her body had been telling the story before her words ever did. It killed me. I lay awake at night remembering the little signs, how she suddenly hated baths. How she flinched when Chase entered the room. How she begged me not to go inside while she played with her cousins in the backyard. And now, I would carry the weight of not seeing it for the rest of my life. Ryan still hadn't called, not even once. He hadn't asked how Maisie was, whether she was sleeping, eating, healing. His silence was louder than anything he could have said, but I had my answer. I had it the moment he stood in that hallway and asked me, why would she lie? Not what happened. Not is she okay? Not tell me everything. No. He wanted to know why Maisie, a 6-year-old child, would fabricate something so horrific about the uncle she used to giggle with. And in that moment, I knew we weren't married anymore. The morning of the court hearing was gray, like the sky itself understood the weight of what was coming. I dressed Maisie in her favorite yellow cardigan, the one with tiny bees stitched on the pockets. She held Lucy's leash tightly as we walked toward the courthouse, even though dogs weren't allowed inside. She didn't want to leave Lucy behind. "She'll be waiting for us when we're done," I whispered, brushing her hair back from her face. Maisie nodded. Brave, but nervous. Always brave. Inside, a child advocate met us in the hallway and guided her to a special witness room. She wouldn't have to testify in front of Chase. Thank God. The state made accommodations so she could speak safely in a room with toys and crayons and professionals who knew how to listen. I sat in the courtroom with my hands folded tightly in my lap. And when they brought Chase in, cuffed, in a suit that didn't quite hide the guilt all over his face, he had the audacity to glance at me just once, like I owed him an explanation. The trial was long. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from the pediatrician, the child psychologist, my own statement, and Maisie's recorded interview, soft but steady, detailing everything in a 6-year-old's voice that broke the hearts of even the court reporters. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Maisie and I walked out of that courthouse hand in hand into a world that suddenly felt a little safer, a little quieter, like maybe the healing could finally begin. Later that week, Ryan finally called. I stared at his name on my screen for nearly a full minute. And then I answered, not because I missed him, but because I wanted closure. His voice was flat, tired. "Lena," he said, "I don't even know where to start." I didn't let him finish. "You start by apologizing to your daughter, but I'm not the one who needs to hear it." He went quiet. Then, I didn't know what to believe. You believe the men who made you laugh more than the little girl who called you daddy. That says everything. I made a mistake, he muttered. No, Ryan, I said. You made a choice, and now you live with it. I hung up, and that was the last time we spoke. Maisie and I moved states. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. New place, new school, new therapists, a whole new chapter. And little by little, I watched the fear in her eyes fade. She started dancing again in the living room. She began drawing pictures of forests and castles instead of shadowy monsters and crying girls. She even made her first real friend at school, a girl named Tasha, who loved reading about dragons. Sometimes I find her whispering to Lucy late at night, cuddled in bed under a blanket fort they build every weekend. I listen in from the hallway. She kept me safe, Maisie says to the dog. Mommy's a hero. Every time I hear it, I have to bite my lip to keep from crying. Because the truth is, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a mother who almost missed the signs. But maybe real heroes aren't the ones who never fail. Maybe they're the ones who choose to act even when it's almost too late. I don't know what the future holds. There will be hard days, scars that never fade, questions I can't always answer. But I know this. My daughter will never be silenced again, and no one will ever convince her that speaking the truth makes her difficult. Because now, she knows what it means to be believed. And for the rest of her life, she'll know. Her voice is her power, and her mother will always, always listen.